What comes to mind when we hear someone describe a story as a tragedy? Copious amounts of death? A horrendous experience? A looming threat of despair? Or maybe all it really takes is some complex series of unfortunate events. Nowadays, just like how some people automatically associate comedy with laughter, others can be just as guilty of associating a tragedy with, well, something tragic. Despite the fact that, emotionally and thematically, looking at these stories through such a simple-minded lens would be doing the genre a great disservice. Any writer can throw in an obligatory character death, or a shocking scene of orphans being slaughtered, but when done poorly, it can potentially elicit the opposite reaction.
No. Shion. Who else will I have ice cream with?
Sometimes writers like Shakespeare will embrace this, juxtaposing tragic events with their own style of comedy, while others like Arthur Miller will take a much quieter approach, making the stories as down-to-earth and relatable as possible. After all, it's already common knowledge that we live in a reality where people die when they are killed, but the stories that continue to be remembered, the ones that continue to inspire others, the ones that continue to be brought up in every English class you've possibly ever taken, are often found answering the question, why should we care that these people have died after being killed? So with all that said, where does Studio Ufotable's 2011 Fate Zero come into play? After all, being based on a series of light novels written by the king of shock factor himself, Gen Urobuchi, many people would and have made the argument that this show could only be considered a tragedy in the superficial sense, especially when compared to its rather lackluster Studio Dean predecessors. Personally, being one of my favorite shows of all time, I couldn't have a more opposite opinion, and it's good to find solace in the fact that I'm possibly not alone in that mentality. In his anthology Poetics, Greek philosopher Aristotle compares some of the earliest iterations of tragedy to other literary forms, all in an attempt to break down different modes of dramatic structure. His goal was to take the grand events that were portrayed during 5th century Greek theater and develop some of the first studies ever that focused on what he believed to be the ideal tragic plot.
When the Greeks came to analyze their new art form, they discerned 3 different types of play, 2 of which we still have with us today, tragedy and comedy. But in many ways, modern tragedy has actually changed from how ancient tragedy worked. For us, tragedy is a play with a sad ending, but for the ancient Greeks, tragedy was a play in which the events offered the audience a tough decision. And because no real ancient tragedy ends conclusively, siding with one course of action or another, what it does is face the audience with a problem. What would they do if they were in the same situation?
Similar to earlier forms of poetry, Aristotle considered tragedy as a type of imitation, not of people themselves, but rather of the actions they make, and how said actions can bring about specific ends. He seemed to believe that life itself was mostly comprised of people trying to progress forward based on their own inferred beliefs, and how the universe ended up responding is how a tragic story begins to form. Initially, this was commonly portrayed through scenarios that often placed gods on the same playing field as humans, and as you can imagine, the layout of the Holy Grail War easily lent itself as an effective device in order for Fate Zero to possess a similar setting.
I hereby swear that I shall be all the good in the world, that I shall defeat all evil in the world.
With epic heroes from throughout history summoned to the modern world, from a physical, mental, and ideological standpoint, everyone is left actively trying to one-up the other in a fight for supremacy.
Seventh heaven clad in the great words of power, come forth from the circle of binding, guardian of scales!
I ask you, are you worthy to be my master?
However, unlike most stories where people can become engaged through intense action or from the supposed lack of a main character, I think it's more appropriate to say that Urobuchi and Nasu focused on using the tropes commonly found in your typical death game plot, all as a means to bring about numerous tragic payoffs. In Fate Zero's case, this is made all the more apparent when considering the show's relative placement in the Fate universe's timeline. After all, as a prequel, the story needed to be written with the pre-established conclusion where no one was meant to succeed. And whether you're the relatable underdog, the self-righteous scholar, the collected purist, or the sacrificial martyr, everyone ended up suffering under the weight of that one single crushing reality. well, almost everyone.
You know, the best entertainers will sometimes get the most acclaim of their careers when they play a really dark and disturbed villain. I think when you get right down to it, God probably loves playing against your cruel and demented villain routine.
Even when a character isn't going through this specific type of suffering, the way they present themselves in the story still harkens back to this ancient form of drama. On the one hand, you have characters like Castor and Ryunosuke, who always present themselves as if they're embracing their roles as villains in some grand tragic story, taking delight in their atrocities every step of the way. While people like Gilgamesh, who already considered everything in the world as his own, sought nothing more than to be entertained by the supposedly pointless actions of the other participants, like some grand spectator who was always above the events that took place on stage.
There are two kinds of arrogance. One where you are unequal to the task, and one where your dreams are too big. The former is just commonplace stupidity, but the latter is a rare species difficult to find.
Even Saber herself, one of the poster characters for the Fate universe, couldn't escape being an extension of this perceived uselessness, acting as a knight who sacrifices her entire being to a lofty goal of being the just king, something that is constantly pointed out as being hypocritical and meaningless when compared to the harsh realities of a world which doesn't always favor those who take the noble path. Even after everything she's confronted with in this season, she still clings to that noble ideal, despite witnessing those who held similar principles like Lancer, whose chivalrous self played a role in his premature demise. Of course, this is nothing new when considering the role of the tragic hero, who's often made distinguished from others with their heightened sense of morality and personal ethics, while still being grounded by some great tragic flaw. Aristotle even refers to this as hamartia, and many scholars have interpreted this as an aspect of the hero's personality that inevitably causes their downfall, or subjects them to some kind of divine retribution. But in this story's case, I think there's a broader philosophical way that this concept could be explored, especially after considering our protagonist and his arguably foolish utilitarian mindset.
No. You are the fool. I can't understand.
Sacrificing the few for the sake of saving the many, Kiritsugu has always worked with the purest of intentions, despite the fact that every step he takes down this blood-stained path leads him more and more into a downward spiral. He's someone who, unlike Saber, understands exactly how twisted this world really is, and when attempting to fix a problem, he usually picks the lesser of two supposed evils, even if the solution found isn't the ideal one we all hope for. However, unlike everyone else whose tragic downfall is brought upon them because of hubris, I think Kiritsugu's hamartia doesn't so much stem from the people he's killed, or even the atrocities he's committed on his quote-unquote noble journey, but rather from his ironic desire to create a world where there is no tragedy.
Kiritsugu Emiya's wish is humanity's salvation, an end to all warfare and bloodshed and suffering, forever. True peace upon the earth.
Honestly, this is not the face of a man who thinks he has all the answers, or even firmly believes that his way of doing things is the right one. Rather, this is the disposition of a tired, desperate child that makes one final push when all else seems pointless. Naively believing in something that seems impossible and bring about world peace, our hero ends up sacrificing everything, only for the epic reversal where the very object he naively puts all his faith into tells him that such a reality is impossible. Even when Kiritsugu comes to this daunting recognition and makes an attempt to destroy the Grail so that such a cycle never repeats itself, the tragic hero is once again punished, simply because you can't change the contents of the story you're in, no matter how hard you might try. But is that really how everything works? Is the only way to truly be happy in this world the same as giving in to your own nihilism and accepting the cold hard truth that nothing really matters? Should we in fact embrace the tragedies of the universe, as doing anything else will simply leave you an empty shell of a man? And if all this is true, then what does it say about someone like me, who claims this to be one of his favorites? You know, maybe I should just shut up and get to my final point. Catharsis. otherwise known as the cleansing or purification in ancient Greek, is what Aristotle claims to be the true aim of the classic tragedy, and can be considered one of the main factors that contributes to their appeal. When we succumb ourselves to the end of these types of stories, the pity and fear that becomes experienced can be traumatic, as if you never want to bear witness to such a world ever again. But there can be more to it than that. Ask anyone that's ever felt emotionally drained by a book, a movie, a TV show. All of them can tell you that sometimes this idea of being left in such a state can also leave you with a feeling of strength and inspiration. Sometimes after bearing witness to another's darkest lows and finding parallels to these events in our own lives, we get the sense that these ideas are shared, that they're part of something greater. But from the ashes, something new can be born, as the world keeps on spinning. And of course, just like every other aspect of the series, this idea is presented through the actions of our remaining characters. It's shown through Waver Velvet, who's not only one of the few who survives participating in the war firsthand, but also makes plans to set out on a journey in order to find his own ideals worth fighting for, with the same passion as those he bore witness to. It's shown through Rin, as she realizes that she must be strong for the rest of the Tosaka family, carrying on the legacy that was left by her father. And finally, it's shown in Shiro, who naively attempts to inherit his father's realistically tragic mindset, but trust me, we'll save the description of his character for a whole other video. Naturally, there's a lot more to talk about with regards to how Fate Zero plays into this influential study of dramatic structure, and I could probably write a whole thesis paper on the subject. But sadly, given the ever-diminishing attention span of the internet, I think I've provided more than enough as to why I find this show so appealing. So, with all of that said, what do you guys think? Given Aristotle's definitions, can Fate Zero be considered a return to form for the classic Greek tragedy? Are there any other anime out there that you think encompass the ideas that he describes? And of course, of all the different ideologies presented in this show's narrative, what characters did you find yourself relating to the most? Leave a comment below and please tell me your thoughts. I've been your middleman of controversy, Mr. AJ Cosplay, and until next time.